Thanks for tuning in to Talks with Tatum. This is...
Sorry. Can we restart?
Yeah.
Okay. Where do you want me to... You want me to just look at you?
You can look at me. You can look at the camera if you really want to emphasize a point or you want to say something to the peoples. They're right there.
Okay.
4, 3, 2, 1.
We gotta work on the problems. We gotta link up to solve them. We gotta keep on evolving. Gotta be side by side. Give it up. Gotta be side by side. Everyone. Gotta be side by side. Yeah. We gotta be side by side. Gotta be side by side. We gotta be side by side. Everyone. Gotta be side by side.
Thanks for tuning in to Talks with Tatum. This is the Side by Side podcast. I'm so happy that you tuned in. And today we got a really, really special one. We got one of those ladies with all the initials after her name. But we got a good friend, Jarah Boyce, on the podcast today.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for showing up. And she wore heels, even though they're not in the video. But how about that? She came prepared.
And try to be sophisticated,
and I'm not even wearing shoes, so how about that? But I'm excited to have you on the podcast. And I remember, just for your sake, this is my wife's best friend. And I remember the first couple of times that I met you, and I remember your spirit, which was so confrontational, it felt like.
Gotta be sometimes.
But it's a spirit of curiosity and openness and not holding anything back. And that was the quality that I came to fall in love with about you. And I think people that know you and people that are in your life, in your circle, I think that's what they appreciate so much about you is your openness and your willingness to have that dialogue and learn and offer information and just be open and authentic. And so I thank you for your spirit.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Of course. Yeah.
So walk me through where that openness comes from.
Oh my gosh. For as long as I can remember, I know you've been around my family.
Yeah.
It's always been our dynamic, you know, like growing up, I was never afraid to say what was on my mind, to say how I was feeling. And it was always met with complete, just unconditional positive regard, you know? Like it was just so wonderful. Becoming a therapist and gaining so much insight and just kind of learning about different dynamics, I come to realize like, wow, that is so special, you know, to be able to be open with, especially, you know, my loved ones, the closest people to me, but also be able to carry that out and kind of set an example for that as well, you know.
So was that easy to keep that type of dynamic with all of your family and being open, even when it's challenging to talk about certain things or even when emotions come into play, especially as you get older and things get a little bit more real than when you're young, you're just kind of blurting things out, or that as you experience trauma and stuff as a whole family, was it easy to keep that openness or did you have to fight to kind of keep that safety?
I think, you know, it's funny that you bring that up. I think with myself becoming an adult and experiencing my own personal traumas, it was difficult to maintain that dynamic with my own personal relationship, you know. Yeah. It was very difficult for me, even coming from, you know, I could talk about whatever, anytime, all the time, right? But getting older and then, you know, realizing how these things affect me, our traumas, and realizing how difficult that is to really talk about, you know.
Okay, so we're already getting into the deep stuff right off the jump here. So as a therapist, as a person that is helping other people wade through trauma, how do you process those traumas as you encounter them?
I started therapy myself.
Okay, go ahead.
I started therapy myself. And let me say, I didn't do it. I knew I always wanted to. That was always the plan for me, but it wasn't before I started my career. You know, so I started my career and And I'm talking to all these people about their coping mechanisms and their traumas and their triggers and all these things. And I was like, you know what? I don't even know my own coping mechanisms, right? Like, I felt like a hypocrite. I was like, I don't even know what my triggers are. Like, why am I working through this stuff with these people? Like, I need to do that with myself first. Can't pour from an empty cup, right? So I started therapy, and oh my gosh, it was a wonderful experience. It was amazing.
Well, there's like humility that you're talking about in that, and being able to turn that mirror back on yourself and say, am I able to pour everything that I need to pour into these people that I'm charged with helping if I can't do the same work on myself, right? Wow. So is that process constantly evolving as you grow on a personal level, the way that you're able to help your clients and the people that you interact with, or how does that work exactly?
And I think it's very difficult sometimes. When I initially started my career, the therapists I worked with, always so supportive. I love working with therapists, social workers, just amazing people, right? Obviously, I'm biased. But when I would talk to them and, just how we're handling different cases and things like that, I would get the feedback of, well, Jarah, you don't have to take responsibility for other people, right? Like, you want your clients to like you so much and you're always thinking something. But for me, it was more so, if the response I'm getting is not necessarily a good response, right? I'm always gonna turn that mirror on myself and say, okay, you know what could I have said differently? What approach could I have taken that they would be more receptive of, right? Because getting into therapy myself, I realized how difficult it is to sit in this chair and talk to a complete stranger and share all these deeply emotional things. A lot of the time, things that you've never shared with anyone else, right? Like, I understand how difficult that is. And so really treating it, so delicately, just making sure, like, hey, this is a safe space. Like, I always tell my clients, if there's ever anything that I said or did that upset you, offended you in any way, please let me know and let's talk through that. Because it is a very sensitive relationship that you have with your client.
So do you feel like that's something that's lacking in the overall profession? Like, there is stagnancy or some sort of like reliance on, this is the way that I do things, and if it doesn't work for you, then it doesn't work for you. Very
much so. 100%. And you know what? I didn't see that until I started working in the inpatient setting. And just seeing, first of all, burnout, high turnover, it's very fast paced. It's just a very difficult setting to work in, right? And so you're so busy trying to get your paperwork done and actually trying to go through your day because there's deadlines you have to meet. You're not even really evaluating yourself as a therapist. You're just like, let's get through it. And keep in mind, when you're hearing the same things every day, when you're seeing the same things all day, every day, even though they're different people, you build up that tolerance, right?
Yeah.
And it can be very difficult to have that empathy with different people.
What's the pivot that allows you to develop that empathy in that setting? Or is there one?
I can't speak for everyone.
Yeah.
But I would say for me personally, it was pouring into me, right? It was really, self-care was on 1,000. Like, I am constantly doing the things that I love. I'm constantly making time for that. I'm also making time for the hard things, like going to therapy and actually processing my past traumas, so I'm not projecting.
Yeah. I think everybody that's a servant in any capacity, whether that's civil service, whether that's, medical workers, anybody that's providing that service constantly, that's constantly emptying out that cup, there is this lack of understanding of what self-care really looks like. And it looks differently for different individuals, but especially in those high high-speed environments, it's not encouraged as much as it should be, because the need is constantly there. On the the church and ministry side, the need never goes away. There's always going to be somebody in the hospital. There's always going to be somebody's relative that's dying. There's always going to be somebody that's being born. Somebody needs to get married. There's always a need constantly. But your availability cannot be 100% of the time, because you need the ability to recalibrate. You need the ability to relax and have that growth time. And what does that environment need to do or shift or change to encourage those habits of self-care, instead of just encouraging the hardest worker, the person that's able to go 1,000,000 miles an hour, and disregard everything that they need to in terms of taking care of themselves? What needs to change?
Boundaries. Boundaries. And I think any therapist, any social worker will definitely just scream that from the mountaintops, because it is so important. And I did not learn that until recently. I will say, I'm pretty early on in my career, but when I started, I was like, I'm diving in. There's so much to learn in this field, and I love what I do, and it's so rewarding. I wanna take it all on. Like, let me just do it, And then it got to the point where I was waking up every morning just filled with anxiety, right? It got to the point where I could barely make it through my day. My mood was all over the place, and it was because I didn't stop. I didn't set boundaries. If I had a pile of work to do and I had to leave at 10 p.m., then I was doing it. I didn't say, you know what, they're not paying me to work 14 hours a day. Let me stop here. Let me pause. Let me go home. I didn't do that, So it was a lot of trial and error, for sure.
Does that kind of originate from the way that you're able to make those personal connections with people, and this idea that you really want to give every single individual the most of yourself?
100%, because you know what? When I was having a hard day at work, when I was inpatient, when I would go and start group therapy, that was therapeutic for me. In a way, that was kind of my break. That was kind of my decompression. Even though, right, I'm taking on that secondhand trauma. We're talking about some hard stuff.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's so authentic. It's so real. We're decompressing. And I hope I can speak for everyone that's been in therapy. After each session, for me personally, I just felt so much lighter. Like, it was it's almost like hard to describe, but it was an amazing feeling, even though I was bawling the whole 15 minutes, right? Even though I was talking about that hard thing that maybe I've been putting off for a while. After that session, I felt really good. And just, again, being on the other side and thinking, man, like, if other people feel that way after they talk to me, this is amazing. Everyone needs to be in therapy. That stigma is definitely going away when it comes to therapy, right? But you still hear, if you tell someone you're in therapy, oh, well, what's wrong with you?
Which is funny, because if you really think about, even physiologically, we're not designed to be carrying the things that we carry, right? We're not designed to take these emotions and these feelings and these complex situations and not only store them and pack them on top of each other and then just shove them down. And it manifests in our body and our posture and our muscles and aches and pains and the way that we process things. All of that stress, all of that anxiety, all of that trauma, if we don't let it out. And the idea that you would build any relationship holding a piece of yourself back, it's just destined to fail every single time, because that's not your authentic true self. You're like partitioning a piece of yourself off And so those spaces that encourage you to be open and that encourage you to be vulnerable, with the safety net, can allow you to transition that energy into those other relationships in your life and talk about it, shift. Oh my gosh.
We are so divine, right? Human beings. We're so complex. Like, there's so much that goes into us. And in today's society, it can be very difficult to not be on the go constantly and like whatever, right? Because our bodies have always been treated like machines. Like, if something's wrong, I'm gonna pop this pill and it's gonna go away and I'm gonna keep moving, right? But that's not real life. That's not realistic. And our bodies are so powerful and our bodies are always talking to us. And if we get to the point of just push it back, I gotta keep moving, I gotta keep going, it's gonna come out in other ways. It's gonna come out no matter what, you know? And that's something that can be very difficult to accept and until we get to rock bottom, and then we have to, right?
Is this dynamic something that kids are struggling with more so than adults in terms of really processing through things, or even having the tools available in their own toolkit to be able to process through these emotions and these traumas?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think with kids, honestly, with kids, it's more authentic, right? In a way that they just don't have the capacity to hold things in the way adults do.
Yeah.
So it is going to come out. It's going to come out constantly if the trauma is bad enough, right? You're going to see it all the time, and you're going to see it in different ways. But you know it's there, and it's more in your face. It's more, it has to be addressed. Whereas adults can push it back. They can keep moving. They can pop the pills. They can just, do something else. And then it can really, really get bad. So I think that's cool too, going back to how the body is set up, how, we're designed, how our bodies are always talking to us, and knowing, right, when you're a kiddo, it's a very sensitive stage in your life. So, you need that. You need that time to really get things out. You need that time. If someone's ignoring you, it's going to come out in different ways. It's going to be in people's spaces. Someone has to do something. They have to, they have to say something, whatever the case may be.
Just worry with this new generation of kids, with all of the distraction that's available and all of the numbing that's available, if they start to learn and develop those numbing tendencies at a far quicker rate than they ever did before. Whereas, when we were growing up, I really feel like there was this space to be innocent, this space to have that genuine childlike response to things, to where things naturally blurt out of you, right? Because your spirit can't contain them. And now, when kids so young with a screen in front of their face, so young, not developing the tools of being able to communicate like this and learning how to communicate like this, and not really being able to have the depth of letting the spirit flow out, feeling the need to confine pieces of themselves because of the internet, or because of mom and dad, or because of the kids at school, or whatever that is, learning that, shoving it down far sooner than they ever did before. Do you see that?
I somewhat agree with what you're saying, but to that I also say there are pros and cons, right? So the numbing, right? We're in the screen all day, we're doing X, Y, Z, but, to bring this up again, because I know we had this conversation the other night, talking to these kids and, just trying to figure out what's going on with them, and hearing something as simple as, they wanted to kill themselves because no one's asking them how their day is, right? They're coming home, no one's asking them how they're feeling, no one's asking them what's on their mind. They don't have that space. right? It's not safe where it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Whereas they get on their phones and you know what? There's all these mental health pages. You know what? They can post something that may be concerning, but someone's going to notice and someone may check in on that. You know, so in a way, it's an outlet. But also, right, with anything, you can use it in a good way. You can use it in a bad way.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a thin line there.
Yeah.
I think the kids today are so accepting of all these different things, right? I think as a kid back then, when, let's say, I mean, and we're not that old, but let's say when we were growing up, I don't know about you, but I never saw, you know, little boys in high school wearing lipstick and dresses and heels and things like that. That would essentially be social suicide in high school.
Yeah.
But you know what? You see it today. Right? So I think that's so cool. And it's not like this huge deal. It's not like this, oh, let's beat that kid up because he's expressing himself. It's, oh, that's cool, you know? And obviously, you know, high school is still high school.
Yeah, I mean,
There's going to be
kids
bullies.
are still kids, yeah.
Right? But just, you know, that ability to be open because you have so much access. You know, let's say you're raised in a very conservative household where, you know, you don't talk about things like that. You're not aware of things like that. Well, you know what? You get on social media and you see that and you learn about that and you're able to form your own opinion on that, right? So I think that can be beneficial as well.
Yeah, I think information is a wonderful thing that kids have far more access, and adults too. They have access to more information than we've ever had before. Where I question is the ability to process that information and the tools to process that information in a healthy way. Because when you think about it, we have a generation now of parents that have now stepped into this world of therapy and self-care and all these things that they've neglected for all of these years. And now there's this energy to, I need to work on me. And very quickly you can cross the line from working on you and then growing your relationships as well to, it's my time to be selfish and I need to work on me. And as a result, not asking the kid how their day was. You're not giving them undivided attention. You want them to be distracted with whatever so that you can focus on what you need to focus on. It's my time. And in that environment, especially not in schools, if you're not getting it from home, if you're not getting it in your communities, you're not learning the tools to be able to wade through nonsense information and get to stuff that's actually going to feed your spirit and your soul, that's actually going to give you skills to make those steps that you need to. You're just going to consume garbage, which is what a lot of us consume most of the time without even realizing it. So where do those tools and those skills come from if they're not coming from mom and dad?
And that, I think that goes down to the whole nature versus nurture argument, right? You learn that a lot majoring in psychology. That's a big discussion, right? Are you going to get it based off of, you know, your own genetics and your own makeup? Are you going to get it from your environment? Is it going to come naturally? You know, whatever the case may be. I think having access to so many different things, I think if you're not getting it at home, and let's say you don't have access to social media, you're probably going to see it on TV. You're probably going to see it when you're walking down the street. And you know what? If someone will answer your question at home, someone else will answer your question somewhere else, right? Whether it's brought to your face, whether someone's asking you those questions and you're kind of forced to talk about it or whatever the case may be, it's always going to come out in some way. It just depends on, I would say, and I don't know if I'm answering your question correctly, but I would say it's more so whatever sparks your interest, right? We're all different. And even if we were raised in a specific household that's like, you need to be into this and you need to be doing this, there's always going to be different things because we are all completely different people.
Yeah.
Right? Me personally, I did not come from a health conscious family. Right? That was never a conversation. That was never really a thing. And that's something that I'm so interested in. That's something that I'm so into. And you know what? I didn't see it at home. I didn't really see it with my friends. And during that time, I didn't even really see it in the media. It was just kind of something that came to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know? So I think whatever sparks your interest, you're going to put that effort into, and you're going to make sure that you are able to process that.
I feel that. I think my question really narrows in on if you're consuming the information and you're reaching out with those questions, or you're getting it from social media or the internet or wherever. I mean, I think we've both experienced how one question can branch off in a million different directions, a lot of which being misinformation, a lot of which being harmful to an individual. How do kids get their resources and the tools necessary to discern what's real and what's not real? For instance, health. You take a young kid that's growing up and maybe they're enamored with somebody like The Rock or some famous person, Chris Hemsworth, or somebody that's really built, really muscular, and they say, I want to live like that. I want to be muscular and big like that. And then they go looking for, how do I become like that? And they get one thing, which is entirely about drugs. And they miss out on all the nutritional information that goes along with that. They miss out on all the training information that goes in on that. And they just go down this one route, which is not the route to ultimately get there, and certainly not in a safe way. But that's the path that they learn because they have no skills or tools to discern which path and which information they should actually use. Where does society step in? Where does health professionals step in? Where do we step in order to help those kids develop those skills to say, hey, that's probably not the smartest decision to go down that route?
I feel like what you're saying really resonates with me. And I think, I know it sounds like maybe you're looking for like an outside source to those things, right? But I want to go back to how powerful our bodies are, right? And how divine we are. When I started getting into being health conscious, when I decided, you know what, I love my body and I really want to take care of it and I really want to figure out how to do that. Well, it started off with, I thought eating super processed white rice and some broccoli every single day, all day was the way to go. Right? Like, that's where I started off. Obviously, I realized pretty quickly that wasn't the way to go. Right? So for me, it came down to listening to my body and listening to what felt right. You know, what mentally, emotionally, because eating is a mental and emotional thing as well, right? Physically. And I think that comes with other information as well. I think another good example would be the kid that was raised in a household, and everyone's going to have their opinions on this, right? Yeah. But the kid that was raised in the household that says, you know, if you're gay, you're going to hell, right? Yeah. If you do this, you're going to hell. If you do that, you're going to hell. Well, if they go out and maybe they have homosexual friends or maybe they have own feelings themselves or whatever the case may be, well, they can listen to their bodies. They can listen to what feels right. And keep in mind, going back to, if you're pressing that down, if you're ignoring that, it's going to come out anyway. Right? So you, at some point, no matter what, you have to get to the point of listening to your body. You know? So just kind of taking that route of getting to know yourself and listening to yourself and using that as a resource. I think that's very important.
So do we have a role to play in teaching kids that relationship with self and body and being able to make that connection? Because, we probably used to have a physical education class. I'm not sure that exists anymore. That might be a seated class now.
Probably, yeah.
I don't think you're allowed to sweat in school anymore. So they're not. If you're never learning a physical connection with your body in terms of testing your body to see what it's capable of, in terms of making that connection, to listen to your body, what role do we play? Is that the next step of mental health? Is connecting the physical to that piece, or what is it?
Are you asking as a parent or just in general?
I'd say both. I mean, on the parent side, it's a little bit easier, especially with a young child. You're constantly talking about his body, right? Little pains, bites, being able to communicate how to use the potty by yourself, how to dress yourself, bathe yourself, those different things, brush your own teeth. All that stuff is an opportunity to make that connection and develop those facilities. But I think in a larger sense, it gets more difficult the older a child gets in order to help them make that connection. Because most of America doesn't have good eating habits. Most of America doesn't have good exercise habits. We're obviously not getting that in schools in terms of nutrition and physical education. We don't have good habits in terms of what we consume, in terms of what we watch, what we listen to. So really setting kids back, if we're talking about making some of those connections to their body, because we're setting them in chairs and saying, sit in a chair from waking to sleeping, and stare at the screen, and eat whatever sludge tastes the best. So where does it come in? Does it come from community? Does it come from medical professionals? Does it come from exclusively parents? Does it come from the government? Where does it come in for people to step in and start developing those things in kids?
I 100% think that it should come from all avenues, right? All aspects. And unfortunately, it doesn't.
Yeah.
I think as a parent, I want to say you have that responsibility to educate yourself so you can educate your child. But I also know that there are cycles, especially when it comes to relationships, familial relationships. If you were raised a certain way, whether you want to or not, you may end up raising your child that way, right? And it starts that cycle. And even if as a child you were like, you know what, I hate it when my mom did this, you could unconsciously do that to your child, right? There are these cycles that are in place. So if no one is there to break that cycle, whether it's you or whether it's a traumatic event that happens in your life or whatever the case may be, if nothing is breaking that cycle, then it definitely can continue. And of course, if it's not coming from the government, if it's not coming from school, if it's not coming from all these different areas in life, then sometimes it just kind of comes down to you, right? Yeah. Sometimes it comes down to you just saying, you know what, I'm not going to continue this. But you have to be able to identify that. You have to be able to have the hard conversations. You have to be able to do the work to acknowledge different things that just have not been working for you.
So everything about your background and everything about the way that you live your life would suggest that you have an understanding of mental health as being larger than just trauma, larger than just the way that the brain works, but that it's all encompassing. Holistic, right? So is that widely accepted in your field? And how do you go about treating people in a way that's considerate of all the other facets of their life besides just how they're neurologically functioning.
I definitely want to say that it is widely accepted in the field, right? Is it acknowledged as much as it should be? Probably not. Are people receptive of it? Probably not so much, right? But definitely it is there, you know. When we're working inpatient, right, as inpatient therapists, and we're doing those psychoeducational groups, we are talking about how what you're eating is affecting your mood, right? Or if you're not eating, how that's affecting your mental and emotional well-being, or your environment, right? If you're in an environment, and especially working with the kiddos, right? You're coming from this environment that's very triggering for you, and you're not really able to do much about it as a kid, unfortunately. And that, I think for me, that was the most difficult piece of working with that population. It's just, you know, you gotta cope, you gotta communicate, you gotta work through it. But you know what? You need that receptive parent on the other end. You need them, you know, they are your support system. They need to be receptive of how you're feeling and what's going on. And that's not always the case. And that's when it comes to, you know, the adult in their life. You know, as a parent, I'm not a parent, but just from what I've seen, your pride is wrapped up in it. And it is hard to accept your faults. It is hard to acknowledge that even when they're right in front of your face in your child, right?
Yeah.
It can be very hard. So it's like, man, in order to take care of them, in order to acknowledge their stuff, I got to acknowledge my stuff too. That's very difficult, you know? So there's a lot that goes into it, but you know, that is something that is discussed. And I would hope that anyone that's been in therapy, that's been brought up, that there are different aspects of it. It's not just what you're thinking, how you're feeling. It's what you're doing, what environment you're in, what you're putting in your body, what you're letting out of your body, right?
Yeah.
The words, the thoughts, those, you know, all that stuff.
It's there's an intentionality that we kind of expect in terms of being intentional about growth and being in the mindset that we're prepared for growth. But the reality is, a lot of times the universe and our spirits just grab us and say, get down here, right? It's not at this time that we choose. And there's resistance, especially for adults, when they've encountered these situations where their child may be in this point of growth, this point of therapy, and really dealing with these vulnerabilities. But the parent may not be ready to address their own things because it's not on their, you know, timetable, and it's not under their control and power. But in order to make any sort of growth or any sort of change, there has to be some level of humility in it, right? There has to be some amount of surrender to the process to be able to come out on the other side. So what do you think is the thing that holds people back from making that commitment to the change?
I think it's the fear of change. I think it's that anxiety. It's that anxiety that sets in when you are in a cycle of chaos and that's all you know. Well, of course, we don't want to be in chaos, right? But I don't know what's on the other side of that. If I break this cycle of chaos, if I go on this healing journey, I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't like that. So I'm not going to do it, right? And it honestly, it comes down to that. And I think for a lot of people on the outside looking in, you would think, well, that's stupid, right? That doesn't make sense. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult.
Well, I know my chaos, and I'm good with my chaos. Yeah, I think there is, you know, we fall in love with comfort and familiarity, and the devil that you know, right? But on the other side of the growth piece is a different future. And in some ways, the future that you were ordained to have, if you're willing to stop clinging so hard to what you already know, stop clinging so hard to your own vision of this is the way that it's supposed to be, and stop clinging so hard to your own terms, and just let that process take fold. You know, I think so many times, and you have children that become adults, right? And you're in your own processing time where you're processing your childhood, you're developing your own mentality and mindset, you're analyzing all this information that you've gotten, and you're determining what the trajectory of your life is going to be. And maybe that's health. Maybe that's living a different healthy lifestyle. And you start to make those tweaks and those changes. You want to take that information back and hand it to your family and hand it to your parents and say, look at what I've learned. And this is what you taught me, but this is what we probably should be doing. And you can treat it with the utmost respect, and you can treat it with all this reverence. But ultimately, a lot of times there's still that resistance to this has gotten me to this point in my life, and you're going to tell me, based on your limited perspective of the world, that I really should be doing something different. And so instead of taking that opportunity to pivot and change and grow, it's often defensive and a recoil. And I don't know, I'd say that's a lot of the reason why, some older adults have never stepped into therapy and still kind of look at it with this negative view. Because I've gotten this far. I've limped this far just fine. Why would I mess with it now? But what do you say to those people that are afraid to touch the whole thing because they're afraid it's all going to come tumbling down?
Well, I think, there are the phases of change, right? There's the pre-contemplation, the contemplation, and so on. And I think from a therapist's perspective, you have to meet them where they're at. You have to meet them where they're at. And you know what? I would say, and I would assume there are probably more difficult settings to work in, but I would say inpatient, a psychiatric facility, is one of the most difficult, And obviously in that setting, you're working with patients that are considered unstable, right? They're not necessarily there wanting to change. They're there because of really, really harsh things, right? So meeting them where they're at and right, hey, even if you don't want to talk in group, even if you don't want to look at me, even if it's F you or whatever the case may be, I'm still going to sit here and I'm still going to talk, and you can listen if you want. If you don't want to listen, that's okay too, right? Maybe tomorrow you don't have to look at me, but maybe you'll listen. And then maybe the day after that, you'll look at me and listen. And maybe the day after that, you'll say something, right? But it's just meeting them where they're at and just not pushing for anything, not pushing for your own agenda, taking a very person-centered approach.
So in your perspective, having had the inpatient and also the practice, what would you call it? Practice clinic, what would you call it?
Private practice?
Yeah. How do they differ in the large ways between that inpatient setting and a setting where you have these established patients, you have these routine meetings? They're not like this people being plucked out of inpatient, thrown back in, this whole deal.
I would say, private practice, the outpatient setting is more calm, more relaxed, more, hey, you know what? I've realized there's some stuff that's going on in my life. I'm not really liking it. I'm ready to do the work. I'm going to pay you this large amount of money because I'm that on board with doing the work. You have those clients that are more receptive, way more receptive, right? And there are pros and cons, I would say, to each side. I think, the inpatient side, maybe they're that adult or that kid who no one ever checked on, who no one ever asked how they were feeling. No one ever, they did not have that. And so it's like, now we're here. Now we're at rock bottom. Now I'm at my most vulnerable state, And I think at that point, sometimes you can become a sponge in a way, right? It's like, you know what? I'm here. I have no options. Let me just listen. Let me be part of this. Whereas sometimes in private practice, sometimes people just want to be listened to. They don't want any feedback. They don't want you to give them a response to what they're saying. I just want you to listen to me for 50 minutes, So, it depends.
You get to be a living, breathing diary, right? That's all people need. I don't feel like writing down these thoughts, so let me come lay them out to you.
But that in itself is beneficial as well. Don't get me wrong.
Be surprised how powerful it is to just hear the sound of your own voice saying things that you maybe thought, but putting a voice to them can change your perspective on some of that stuff in a really meaningful way. Yeah. So kids hitting this moment of rock bottom, we think often about jail as, the whole concept, right, is it's supposed to be this rehabilitation, right? It's supposed to be this idea of changing behaviors, changing mentalities in order to put out people back into society that are reformed, that are evolved and grown. But the reality is our system doesn't work that way. Despite having institutions where kids can reach that rock bottom and be unstable and have the support to process through things, suicide is top 3 cause of death for young people in the United States. Overdoses are as high as they've ever been for young people. The list goes on, that are all things that point back to mental health. Why, with this hyper attention on mental health, are we still, by all means, failing at reaching the most vulnerable population?
I would say working with that population, there's a lot of dead ends, right? There's a lot of wait lists. There's a lot of, oh, you can do this, but you need to do 80 other things first, and then you'll get on the wait list. And then 3 years later, we'll reach out to you. There are a lot of dead ends because it is such a vulnerable population. And I would say sometimes even when you are offered access to these things, again, just going back to those cycles and that fear of the unknown, you don't want it. It's very difficult, and I would say as well, people are taken advantage of. And even, let's say they had one bad experience with a therapist. Let's say that therapist said something really mean and hateful because maybe that therapist was having a bad day. That's kind of how our brains work. We tend to overgeneralize and we want to simplify things. And so now it's every therapist ever is a bad person. And I don't ever want to do that again. Just going back to how sensitive that relationship is, how delicate it is. If we take a wrong step somewhere, it could really be detrimental moving forward. And I think, me personally, I think that's something a lot of therapists don't realize, is, how your words are affecting this person on the other side that's coming to you with their deepest thoughts, emotions, and feelings. We may build a relationship with a client. Maybe I've been seeing this client for 1.5 years, and maybe I said something playful because, we have a relationship now, and maybe that really affected them in a negative way. And maybe they're carrying that now, It can be very difficult.
It's a tough gig. And I think from my perspective, what I've seen is there's a degradation of community and the idea of really all of society being involved in community, but it really affects kids probably more than anybody else in terms of having access to all of these different community groups, whether it be teams, whether it be Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts type of thing, whether it be church groups, all of these different access points that they have to community, to adults in leadership roles, to develop the relationships with them that allow kids not to really fall through the cracks as much, because they have all of these different touch points where you may not feel comfortable with this person, you may not feel comfortable with this person, but there may be one of those people that you feel comfortable enough to open up with and have that entry-level conversation. And that person, through their years of service, has the tools necessary to escalate that if it's necessary. And sometimes I think things get ignored, kids kind of fall through the cracks, or sometimes, I'm sure you see this, kids kind of get escalated up to therapy before they've really ever even had any entry-level conversations about what they're processing, and they're just not ready for that yet. And then maybe you have a bad experience because you're not ready for that yet, and it turns you off from something you're going to ultimately need. Because maybe mom and dad aren't ready to have that conversation with you, and they're not able to have that conversation, but maybe a coach could have that conversation, or a youth leader, or maybe a teacher or a counselor at your school. But without all of those different relationships that you have in your life, with all of those adults along the way, if it's not going great at home, who is the person that you're able to lean on? And I don't think kids have that in the way that previous generations had that. Maybe it's just one teacher. Maybe it was a guidance counselor. Maybe it was a friend's parent. But that one person that you can just have the conversation with and say, hey, my relationship with my mom is really, really struggling. And I don't feel safe sometimes. I don't feel like I can talk to her about these things that are happening with my body. And have that person you can talk to about, and not feel ashamed, and not feel scared, and not have to figure it all out on your own. And not have to just pull your phone out and try to Google everything to figure it out, because it's overwhelming, right? And to be a young kid and to have to be an adult and process all of this stuff that you're not meant to process yet alone is very scary. And that fear can very quickly lead into some real anxiety and some other things that can very quickly lead you down a road to unsafe behavior.
And I love that you said that. I think with mental health being so profound in society now, it's like, and I've seen this and I've dealt with this with a lot of parents, right, of children and adolescents. It's, you're taking your kid to therapy, but they're sitting there and they're staring at you because they don't want to, they don't want to be there. And the parent's like, well, they need to talk to someone. They need to do something. They need to whatever.
They're
but
not
it's like
talking to me.
Right. Again, it's like they are not ready. Right. So if that's the case, if it comes down to the janitor at school that listens to them sometimes in passing period, right? Or ask them how they're doing. They've built that relationship. They did that work. And you know what? They want to talk to them. They want to talk to their coach. They want to talk to, whomever is in their lives. It can be that simple. Or it can be as simple as just sitting with someone. It doesn't always have to be, let's sit in this room, sit on this couch and tell me how you're feeling. Tell me your deepest thoughts. It's, I think we make everything in society more complex than it needs to be.
Well,
right?
There's a level of, as an adult, what do you want more than anything is, I think, to be seen, to be acknowledged for who you are, what you bring to the table, and to be appreciated, regardless of your flaws, regardless of what things that you're carrying. You just want to be seen. And we seek out and yearn for that authenticity. It's the reason why we make the connections that we do in life, are the people that make us feel seen. And kids need that just as much as anybody else. And there's a dynamic where we're so distracted trying to get what we need sometimes that we fail to make kids feel seen. And there's not social structures to make sure that kids are being seen. And what we don't realize is that with all of the technology, yes, it's wonderful in terms of access for things and convenience and communication and all those things. But without the instantaneousness of that communication and the distance of that communication, there is a necessity for me to literally see you and to interact with you. At the bare minimum, to look at you, I have to acknowledge you. And when our interactions are this, there is a level of being seen to some degree that's far more than just I made a post online and nobody liked it. And I think just talking with kids, like the idea of you picking up the phone and having a conversation with somebody is like terrifying. You gotta call in a pizza order or something. It's like, can I just text them or can I just order online? It induces this anxiety and this nervousness because those social skills aren't there. And if the social skills aren't there to develop that relationship, the social skills aren't there to make someone else feel seen in that way. And so you have situations where people are reaching out and maybe they're making a post and they're just talking about these feelings that they have that are negative feelings. At a certain point, we see so much of everybody online and all these things that we just scroll right past it. We don't even, we don't acknowledge some of these cries for help because we're really not seeing people. We're just seeing what people want us to see. We're not really acknowledging people's authentic self. And so, you know, whenever I'm around kids, I always try to really hit on this idea of like communication and developing those communication skills because it's only going to serve to benefit you. And then what doors does that open to everyone around you? That you can actually interact with them in a way that's meaningful and powerful to them and ultimately meaningful and powerful to you. Because some of the conversations that are needed are conversations that are with peer groups. It's not even so much always about finding this great wise adult that's going to listen. All those conversations used to happen with peer groups, with friends and these other things. And some of that happens. But I think sometimes the kids have those conversations and they don't know what to do with it. You know, I hear these stories about, you know, I've got this friend that's struggling and he started to take some pills and do some things and he talks about not being of value and he talks like he's maybe going to kill himself and that I don't know what to do or who to tell about that or how to process that. And what a weight to put on a kid, right, to have to carry all that. But also, you got to give those kids tools, not only just to be able to talk to their friend or be there for their friend, but also to be able to elevate it to whoever needs to be elevated, not just hold that in. Because I don't have the skills to be able to call a counselor at the school or to tell my parents or to tell my friends' parents or to, you know. It's scary stuff.
And you know what? I want to say, you know, going back to the school setting, I worked in the school setting for a little bit. And for me, it was so shocking to see, you know, wow, these teachers know nothing about mental and emotional well-being. These school counselors know nothing about it, you know. They're identifying these kids that are struggling in school or at home as bad kids. And that's it. And it's written off after that. Oh, they're a bad kid, you know. Or if they're acting up in the classroom, right? Because what we talked about earlier, you know, it's going to come out mostly with kiddos and their behaviors. And the teachers will throw them out in the hallway. Because they're the bad kid, they're the problem kid, and they need to move on and, you know, finish their lesson. You know, so not really having that information on a trauma-informed classroom or just trauma-informed care in general. For me, that was shocking. And I realized how much of a need was there as well. You know, luckily there are nonprofit organizations that do trainings in schools, and, you know, they're teaching these educators about, you know, different trauma-informed approaches and things like that. And I know that there are nonprofits that are putting social workers and therapists in schools to support them, whether, you know, they're in poverty or they just need someone to talk to or whatever the case may be. So these things are happening. Is it happening enough? No, it's probably never going to happen enough, right?
Yeah.
But there are things in place. There are programs. There are different things. I think there's such a lack of knowledge there, though, right? There are so many resources. And I think it's so wonderful, right, becoming a social worker and learning about the resources that are there, because, man, someone can just be having the absolute worst time in their lives, and it could be something as simple as making a phone call and, you know, they're good. Like, things are good.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen that, and it's crazy because also there's limited resources. So not enough people know for a reason at the same time.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy how powerful showing up for somebody can be to change the trajectory of their life. I mean, especially in a lot of these situations, you think of I've had kiddos that are, you know, they're struggling in class, they're getting kicked out of class, they're falling asleep in class, and the teacher is perceiving it in this one way, right? Like, this kid doesn't respect me, doesn't care about this class, you know, and it's turning off that relationship that they could be having with the kid. So they start to see him in this vein. But what they don't know is beneath the surface of all of that, you know, that kid is living in an abusive home where his stepfather is beating on his mother. And as a result of that, his mom has ran away from the home, and now they're sleeping on the street. And when she's able to get off of work soon enough, they do get to sleep in a shelter. But only if she's able to get there in enough time to get a bed. All of these things are happening. They're happening beneath the surface that teacher doesn't know. And all it takes is just a little bit of empathy and a little bit of redirection and a little bit of help, you know, to trickle to that child, to trickle to that mother. And now all of a sudden, it's a stable household where the mom has what she needs to thrive, the kids have what they need to thrive. And now that student that was that bad student is this exemplary student that is getting the highest marks in all their classes, and they're able to provide a different life for their family. And just as easily as that outcome could happen, that kid could be thrust into a gang environment as a teenager because they were never able to achieve any stability, and they had to go out and figure out how to put food in their family's mouth. But we don't recognize how thin a line that is between those two different outcomes, and how every person that touches that child and that parent along the way has the potential to push somebody over the line one direction or the other. It's scary when there's no processing of that. And there's a churning out of teachers, and understandably so, right? Like, because if there's any field that there's this huge burnout, it's social workers, it's teachers, it's front-facing workers, because it's exhausting. And coming out of the pandemic, it's not less exhausting. It's if anything, it's more. But there's a requirement of intentionality when it comes to the empathy, and as soon as you lose that piece, then you lose your connection to the whole thing. So what are you doing to keep that thread alive for you?
I would say, you know, working with kids, I personally do not think that kids get enough credit as far as the things that they know, you know, the way they're listening to their bodies. You know, a kid, especially younger kids, from my experience anyway, they will call you out and they will say, like, I know you're not being genuine. You know, like, I know you're not telling the truth. I know you're just XYZ. I know you're just checking a box. I know you're just, And again, I don't think that's a response from a bad kid. I think that's authentic, right? Because we forget the energy that comes with the things that we're saying, right? If we're having an authentic conversation, it's gonna feel that way. If I'm just saying something that I'm supposed to say, if I'm reading a script, if I'm checking a box, it's going to feel that way, And so I feel like I'm hitting on this so much, but again, just going back to kind of listening to your body, me being cognizant of that, I'm going to have that authentic connection with them. I'm going to come from a genuine place when I'm talking to them. If I'm not in the mental and emotional headspace to do so, then I'm gonna set that boundary. I'm gonna set that boundary with myself. I'm gonna set that boundary with whomever's around me, because I know that there's a lot of energy that comes with the words that we say.
No, I'm saying, there has to be days where you're not feeling it. So how do you wade through that when you're not feeling it? Or are you just like, I don't have the capacity today, so reschedule?
Well, it depends. Like, in the inpatient setting, if I'm just not really feeling it, I'll let them know, like, hey, you know what? I'll come back and I'll check in with you. Because we're teaching this, we're shouting this from the mountaintops. We have to do it for ourselves, right?
That's interesting, because that's not somebody dies, it doesn't matter it doesn't matter, like, if I'm on my A game or not. I mean, it does matter if I have to, it matters to the family whether I'm on my A game, but it doesn't matter how I feel personally. It's not like, there are no sick days in ministry. Like, you set your wedding date August 29th. You don't get to be sick on August 29th. Like, it is what it is. Somebody in your family dies, and I gotta show up to the hospital. I gotta do all the things. It's expected. There's somebody sick at home right now, and I just found out right before the day we left. I'm like, please don't die before I get back. Please don't get hospitalized more or die before I'm able to visit you in the hospital, because there's no real sick days like that. But there is a beauty. Like, I had a pastor friend of mine resign, and it was a heavy thing. And so his last service, I played at that church before I went to my church. And I got to have my interactions with him, and I trying to play and lead music. And I'm like crying in between every time playing. It's just like, it's heavy stuff, right? Yeah. And then I have to drive, and I'm crying the whole drive because it's emotional stuff. And it's gut-wrenching. And then I have to go through this whole service. And at the end of the service, I'm like so thankful and appreciative to my congregation, because I wasn't all the way there when I walked through the doors. But the way that they held me, the way that they loved me, and the way that they responded to what my spirit was, allowed me to be present and allowed me to let that thing go and be who I needed to be while I was there. And sometimes the willingness to show up through whatever that thing that's eating at you, that's got you out of alignment, is the thing that allows you to get in realignment. It's like the discomfort on the other side of, and that's when I think of therapy, that's what I think of. It's like the discomfort right before that pop when things slide back in realignment.
And you know what? I feel like there's a very thin line, right? We know that boundaries are important, but we also need to know that discomfort is okay, right? So if I am playing basketball and I don't feel like going to practice today, or maybe I had a really bad game and I don't feel like playing basketball anymore, that doesn't necessarily mean, all right, we're dropping it, we're done. Boundaries, right? Like, that's not what that means.
Yeah.
You know, so we do need that mental and emotional push sometimes. Like, you know what? I don't want to do this. I don't feel like doing this. I'm really not in a good headspace, but I'm going to do it anyway. And on the other end of that, it may be so much better. You know, I may learn something new. I may have engaged in a new activity. I may have met a new person. So it just kind of comes with really being able to challenge yourself. But also I want to say that the standard American mindset is keep going, right? You just said earlier, I can't be sick on that day. You know, this is what it is. This is the expectation. This is what I have to do. So I'm kind of curious to know how do you prevent that burnout?
I think really interesting. Well, first of all, I have to acknowledge, so there is that mentality, right, of like, I need to be where I need to be. And it's really kind of funny how that's shifted a little bit in recent times. Like, what was it? That would have been Friday. So Ed Sheeran does a big concert in Boston, right? And I don't know if you know Khalid, but he was supposed to open for Ed Sheeran. I don't know what happened, but something happened. And Khalid had to back out. And John Mayer goes and opens for Ed Sheeran, which is a huge deal because Ed Sheeran's not bigger than John Mayer. You know, that's a headliner. Probably can't tell you the last time he opened for somebody, right? It's probably Dave Matthews Band or somebody in the 90s, right? But he did that for his friend. And there has to be within a community this element of understanding your own limits and also holding each other. And so there is an element of, for whatever reason, I can't fulfill this commitment, and I have a stable of people that I hold and that also hold me that would gladly step in my stead. But there also has to be this understanding, in the same way that being an athlete, that's an element of being professional, is that I'm not going to let nicks and boo-boos stand in the way of me showing up in the way that I need to. And part of that is the relational piece of ministry. And this idea that I've developed a relationship with these people. And so if somebody is hurting and in a situation where they need me to show up for them, even though I may not be 100%, that relationship would call me to show up at 79%. And just for the relationship, me at 79% is probably better than some other person at 100%. And so I'm going to give them that 79%. Because it's a reciprocal relationship. And also, it's the servant mentality of, it's a privilege for me to show up in that situation, not a burden. And that intentionality can very easily change all of the energy. It's what shifts fasting from starving. It's all intentionality. They're the same. You don't eat for 7 days. You are starving. You're literally starving yourself. But what makes it fasting? Shift. It's not a lack of access to food. It's not an inability to eat. It's a choice. And so serving with the right intentionality will always be a blessing and a privilege. It's when it starts to be a burden and you're not able to make that transition and that shift to see it as a privilege that you need to do that internal work to say, is this where I'm called to be? Is this what I'm called to do? And have I done the work that I need to do to replenish myself in order to do it well? And sometimes it's all three of those things. Sometimes it's you're not in the right place. You're not doing what you're called to do, and you're not refilling your cup. And sometimes it's just you're not doing the self-care that you need to, and you need to take a break and a breath. But we go so fast in all of these different professions, especially when you're helping people, that you're not giving yourself time to reflect and analyze and do that after action report. It's like a military thing, right? But like, whenever you do something, you need to be able to step back, evaluate it so that you can either improve upon it or continue those same things that were effective for you. But you need to have that space to analyze. And when it's go, 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 you're probably in some type of cycle of making the same mistake over and over and over again. Maybe compounding upon that mistake. But you haven't given yourself space to process.
And I want to say I love that you said that. And I want to tell a story too.
Tell it.
About you.
Uh-oh.
The other day, I was cutting this watermelon and I was like, you know what? This isn't a good watermelon. Like, you know what? The other one I had was so much better. It was so much sweeter. And you were like, you know what? If you respect your food more, you would enjoy it more. And that was like that light bulb moment. Right? Like, I've been thinking about that every day since you said that to me. Like, wow, you know, like, that's where that gratitude comes in. And that's where that mindfulness comes into play, right? I need to be so grateful that I'm able to have this watermelon that nourishes my body, you know, instead of saying how something else was better, something else was sweeter, right? That can in itself put you in a cycle, you know, so that intentionality is so huge, you know.
I mean, in some ways, it's the only power that we have, right? To direct our thoughts and our energy. And every thought in some way is a choice, right, of what we're going to put the emphasis on. Like, we can always choose the thing that's hypercritical or that's negative in one way or another. And there are plenty of times that that's appropriate, right? There's plenty of times that you need to be critical of yourself. But there has to be this awareness of helping, hurting. And if something isn't helping you, let it go. Let it go. Let it go. And it's incredibly simple, but it's profound in the way that it's able to teach you how to efficiently use your energy. Because the reason why we go is because we are incredibly inefficient with our time, with our energy, with our mindset. And as a result, we feel like we need to cram so much in our day because we waste so much of our day. But when you fill your day with positive energy and positive thoughts, you fill your day with good people and good interactions, you are never going to feel like you didn't get enough. Never going to feel like your day was empty or your day was unproductive or your day was less than you hoped it would be. Because you've let the day take you instead of you taking the day. Just taking a ride.
And you know what? I always tell my clients, you know, you are in control of your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings, your behaviors. And that is so powerful. You know, I hear so much from people struggling with anxiety. Well, I just want to control this and I just want to make sure this is good. And I know I don't have control over it, but I'm going to do everything I can, or whatever the case may be, right? But you have to trust your power. You have to be able to identify your power and kind of dive into that. Knowing that, you know what? I can control my perspective on this, and that's going to change my whole outlook our worldview is subjective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
I can decide whether to punch this person in the face or not, right? And that's two different paths.
Yeah.
So that is so powerful, and I think not enough people realize that.
And I think a lot of our mindset is almost punishing ourselves for the decisions that we've made in the moments before. There's a real lack of ability to ground ourselves in the present, right? Because we're always constantly looking backwards and in some ways identifying ourselves with our previous decisions, sometimes labeling ourselves with our previous decisions, sometimes punishing ourselves for our previous decisions. And every time that we take that breath and we're looking backwards, well, we're missing what's here. And then we ultimately miss what's next. And life is just about moments, right? Moments build momentum, moment after moment after moment. And you can't control what you did in the last moment, but you can control what you do in this moment. And it's not about the last moment. It's just about this moment, and then the next moment, and then the next moment. And before you know it, you have momentum. But I don't know who told us that we could change the past. But we sure spend a lot of time there.
And the negative aspects of it too, I would say. Right?
I'm certainly not in the positive.
And I would say, I think we know that when a negative experience happens, it's going to bring much more of a biological response out of us than a positive one. And I mean, some may disagree with me, but historically, and this is something we talk to the kiddos about a lot, right? Back in the hunter-gatherer days, back in the caveman days and all that good stuff, right? If I saw a lion and that lion was running towards me, if I didn't feel anything, I probably wouldn't do anything about it, right? Wouldn't run, wouldn't hide, just would kind of, oh, okay, yeah, that's happening, right? Whereas that fight or flight kicks in, right? You feel this intense emotional response. That adrenaline is pumping. Your body's saying, hey, you're not safe. We got to go somewhere. We got to do something. We got to get back to safety. That's intense, right? That's a big deal. Our bodies remember that. We're going to hold on to that. And guess what? Next time I see a lion, I'm going to feel that way again. So it's more of a safety thing. And it comes down to really shifting our perspectives when it comes to these negative things, right? These negative experiences, that fear. Because there are positive aspects to that as well.
I would counter to say the whole thing is positive. I mean, if I'm a hunter-gatherer, right, and I'm thinking about an encounter with a lion, you can look at it in the negative, or you can harness that fight or flight, which is really just telling your body, wake up, pay attention, right? Not necessarily fear. I mean, we label those things with fear, but it's really just hyper awareness, right? Channel that hyper awareness into killing that lion and feeding your family, right? And those same emotions would go when it's time for you to stand up in front of the class, or an auditorium full of people, or a stadium full of people, and perform or speak. The same thing happens. The same fight or flight happens. And that is, if you did not have any emotional response to that type of situation, you would not perform at your best. Because you wouldn't be as aware as you need to be. You wouldn't be fully present. It's literally your body saying, hey, right here, right now, nothing else matters. And we need that emotional response, especially in good moments.
100%.
So that we can erase all of this focus on everything else and be hyper-focused on this moment that's happening right now. Because it may never come again. It may never come again. And when you learn how to channel that energy and that emotion into presence, then you learn how to be present across the board. Because we learn how to be present in these negative emotions. But our present is to run the opposite direction. We learn how to be present and start running. We learn how to be present and avoid adversity. We learn how to be present and evacuate ourselves from anything that makes us feel uncomfortable. Instead of be present and sit with adversity. Be present and sit with the uncomfortable. Be present and work through whatever that obstacle is. Nothing is good or bad. It's all perspective, and it's all what you do with it. I mean, it's the worst things. You know, I had this whole life planned out for myself, and I was going to go play ball and get this great education. I was going to play in the league for a little bit and whatever. And I had these injuries that happened, and that didn't happen. And the worst thing that ever happened to me, these injuries that made me lose all this stuff that I wanted, these surgeries, all this stuff, was the best thing that ever happened to me. The best thing that ever happened to me. Because it got me out of being so hyper-focused on what I wanted for my life and let me just be driven by what I was supposed to be doing with my life. And let me be present for all these other encounters that I got to have and learn that maybe you're just called to sit with people. Maybe you're just called to help people. Maybe you're just called to be something that's bigger than yourself.
100%. It's not what you wanted, it's what you needed.
And we all have that pivot moment that's available to us. But if we never develop the tools to be present, then we're going to miss it every time.
100%.
And that's what's scary. Is because how many people are walking out there living purposeless lives because they've ignored all of the moments that have come across their path to pivot, to change, to grow, to transform.
And you know what? There's no rule book to it, right?
It'd be wrong if there was.
And I would say no one lives a purposeless life. I would say even if a person went through life not doing anything they wanted to do, not saying that thing or being with that person or whatever the case may be, and even if they stuck to that, even up until the day they died, right? You know, depending on your beliefs, you're going to learn, you're going to do better. There's always going to be some value that comes in something.
See, but we're talking about two different things. Value and purpose are two separate things. And I think everybody has a life that has value, and everybody has a life that offers something. But a purposeless life is a life where you don't live out your purpose. And everybody's got a purpose on their life where they don't live their life with purpose, with intentionality. You can provide great value and all these different things, but when you're not living your life with intention and with purpose, you're missing all of the extra 10% on top, right? You're missing the way that you're truly able to make an impact. And that, there's a piece of me that mourns that for people, because at any point you can make that transition. And it doesn't have, I mean, you can be the janitor at the school. It's not that you have this grand career or job. It's that you live your life with intention. With the intention to be there for the people that you care about, with the intention to offer something to the world, with the intention to pour positivity in the world, whatever that intention is, but that you do what you do with purpose. And you can make that transition at 70 years old if you want to. You can make it at 10 or 12. It's literally just you making the commitment to.
I agree with that.
And it scares me because I feel like that number grows with every passing year, because we're not being taught how to be intentional. We're not intentional with our communications. We're not intentional with our relationships. We're not intentional with what, and I can speak just as much as anybody else, we're not intentional with what we put in our mouths, with what we put in our ears, with what we watch with our eyes, with the way that we spend our time. We're distracted. And that distraction causes us to move without purpose. And it's a disconnect from everything that you've said about being in touch with our bodies. Because to be in touch, we have to move with intention. And we have to be purposeful with our movement, with our thoughts, with our emotions, all of it. And it's the reason why we're dealing with cancer and diabetes and high blood pressure and heart disease and all of these different things. Because we're so out of touch with this. And I can speak to it as much as anybody. You know, I didn't get here with one donut, you know.
We all can. We all
But
can speak
it's
to
a
that.
gradual process of intentionality. It doesn't happen overnight, but you didn't get where you are overnight. And that's okay. But if we were all just to commit ourselves to even just the slightest bit of more intentionality, imagine where we would be. And I mean, you're setting that example because you go and, you know, as you have clients and you're sitting with them, you're doing it with intentionality and with purpose, and you're showing up for them. And they see it. You're modeling that.
But I would say everyone models that in their own way, right? Even
Go
if
ahead.
they're not cognizant of that. I would say, you know, there's always that accountability that needs to come into play when it comes to being intentional and things like that. But I think everyone's experiences shape them in a way, good or bad, right? But we need to have the bad, or else there wouldn't be any good, right? We need to have the distractions. We need to have the purposeless interactions or whatever the case may be. That needs to be in place. I think everything is in place for a reason. And when you let go of that, right? And when you say, you know what, I'll live moment to moment. I'll set my own example. I'll build my relationship with myself. And in the process of that, I am changing. I am changing the world. I am, right? Setting that example. You have a son now, you know. You're adding people to this world and also able to shape them in certain ways. And again, realizing the small things, and that's not a small thing, but realizing how powerful the simple things are, right? Knowing that we don't need to be fearful of anything that takes place, right? Because thinking, you said that earlier, our perspective is what makes things what they are. But if we let go of some of that control, if we let go of some of that fear, and we're really able to be our true authentic selves, I would say.
The thing that we're the most afraid of is the thing that frees us. Surrender. That's all it is. Surrender to this idea that you cannot control everything. Surrender to this idea that in order to make the progress and the growth that you want to make, that you're going to have to let go of your tight grip on the wheel.
And that is very difficult to do. Make no mistake. Like, letting go of that need for control is absolutely terrifying. And I will speak for that, you know, from personal experience. It is very terrifying to tell yourself, I don't know what's going to happen. I am not in charge of what's going to happen. I am just here. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. Like, it's very difficult to do that.
Well, it's because one of the very first things that we develop in our transition to becoming fully fledged humans, right, is this body autonomy, right? It's one of the things that we develop that feels the first thing that really feels like our own. And once in order to surrender, we have to completely let go of all of it, right? And that the very first thing we get is not the thing that we want to let go of, right? But you have to let go of all of it in order to be fully present. But at the same time, we tell ourselves that we have a need to control. But we have a want to control. We don't have a need to control. We don't need to control anything. We want to control everything. But we don't need to control anything. Right? It's not one of our basic needs. It's not a necessity. It's a desire. So even just reframing the language, I want to control, as opposed to like, I need it. There's an ability to relinquish a little bit there. If it's just a want, I can let it go far easier than if I've labeled it as a need.
And I would say that goes back to the standard American mindset as well.
Yeah.
Right? And treating our bodies like they're machines that need to be manipulated. Right? And I would say even in therapy, there's this, sometimes in that psychoeducational piece, there are books and things and studies that say, well, our bodies just, misconstrue something. Sometimes we just have to trick our bodies into thinking that, sometimes our minds are just overreactive about, blah, blah, blah. But that takes away that listening piece. That's that, it's just my body, being confused. Let me just take this pill. Now I'm not confused anymore. It's just, it's just my body doing this. Let me manipulate my body in some way to get back to business, essentially.
We love a shortcut, don't we?
Oh my gosh, don't we? And yeah, I think that's a huge thing, just going back to building that relationship with yourself. And once you actually accept those parts that you may not like so much, there's so much growth that comes with that.
Yeah, well, that's its own special can of worms, the idea of self-acceptance, right? Because that's not something that we're trained to do. And it's not something that society really reinforces, right? Because you having that self-doubt limits your power. Because you're not your fully fledged self if you have questions and doubts about yourself, if there's pieces of yourself that you despise or you don't want to acknowledge. When you're not being your true and authentic self, you're not being your full self. And there's lots of pieces of society that would prefer that you're never your full self.
Oh, yeah.
But in order to be the best version of yourself, you have to acknowledge all of yourself, the good, the bad, the ugly, the flaws, the beautiful pieces, and it's not by accident, right? All those scars you earned along the way, all those flaws were developed over time, and all that growth that you made was earned. And accepting all of that and the full, complete picture is what allows you to become the next piece of yourself. It allows you to build upon that. But I mean, if you just chop off a huge piece of it and say, I'm never going to acknowledge this, there's no stability in that. There's no growth from that. You used to be walking around without an arm and a leg, just limping around, right?
You know, and I would say personally that takes a lot of time, right? Even growing up in an environment where it was okay for me to say whatever was on my mind, right? It was okay for me to express my feelings, and that was always met with a positive, supportive response. Going back, it's still a difficult thing to do, right? It's still a difficult thing to acknowledge, man, this person I'm in a relationship with, I always feel bad after interacting with them, right? It's difficult to acknowledge something like that.
Yeah.
And that's very fair to say when it comes to long-term friendships. Man, they're just not filling my cup anymore. You know, I don't want to hang out with them anymore. It's difficult.
It's very difficult.
You know, there's so much that ties into that. So I think it's important to acknowledge, even though it may sound simple just saying it, right? Because it's always easier said than done. It's so important to acknowledge how difficult that is and how much strength that takes. And I think there's this idea in society that acting like nothing bothers you is strong, right? Like, I'm going to keep it moving. I'm going to keep it pushing. You know, words will never hurt me. Whatever the case may be, that's weak. That is true weakness. And true strength is being vulnerable. It is having those hard conversations. It is saying, you know what? That hurt my feelings. It is being okay with crying, even in public places. That is true strength, because that is something that is so difficult to do.
And there's a level of acknowledging emotions and feelings and being vulnerable and all of those things and honoring those safe spaces, while at the same time not letting those things affect your trajectory, right? Because there's two sides of the coin. There's one side of completely ignoring those pieces of yourself, right? And there's the other side, overindulging in that and allowing it to stop your progress. So there exists this middle ground, which I think we should all strive for, which is entirely acknowledging those things, doing the work to address our vulnerabilities, our trauma, and processing, while also continuing to make steps forward and not letting those things be an excuse for us not to make forward progress. I think that's where our society right now is clashing, because I think the two extremes are the loudest voices. And I think there is an overindulgence in just sitting in your feelings and using it as an excuse not to grow, evolve, and make progress. And I think there's a ridiculousness to not acknowledging your feelings and just shoving it further down. You know, you're just creating this powder keg. But you can do both. You can, at the same time, make progress and acknowledge your feelings. And I don't think we need to be afraid to say that. But I feel like people are afraid to say that, right? Because we don't want to offend people that want to be vulnerable and address those things. But sometimes it's okay for somebody to say something that hurts your feelings. It's okay for somebody to say something that you don't like, because maybe you don't like it because it's hitting you in a place that you know is true. That's okay. That's okay for you to feel that, sit with that, and chew on it and process it and use that to make the step forward. You know, I think we fear what we don't understand.
100%.
But I think that we have far more in common than we realize if we're willing to do some of the work of having the conversation. Because we don't understand, because we don't ever try to understand. We don't ever try to have the conversation. Much easier for me to just label you as this and just cast you aside. I don't have to think about you. I don't have to worry about you. I don't need to understand you because I know what you are. But that's ridiculous. Is it possible to evolve into the best version of yourself, the person that you're supposed to be, without therapy?
I would say so. I'm not gonna say, I mean, therapy is definitely an addition, right? But I don't want to say that it's the path that needs to be taken. You know, everything is so subjective, and it really depends on what works best for you.
How important is it that you have somebody walk that journey with you, whether it be for accountability, whether it be for support, whether it be for any type of just a person to bounce ideas off of? How important is that support system?
I think 100%, like, it's essential. It is a need. I think we are designed for connection. We need that human connection. So that is important. Like, you do need someone there.
And for those people that are on the fence about taking the plunge and doing the search for a therapist or reaching out for that resource that's going to give them somebody to talk to somebody to work things through with, what do you tell that person that's on the fence about whether to commit to therapy?
I would never want to convince someone. I wouldn't want to, if they're on the fence about it, that's the phase of change that they're in. And, that's a decision that they need to make for themselves. Of course, you can always talk about potential benefits and things like that and whatever the case may be, but ultimately they have to make that decision. They have to take that leap.
That was such a therapist answer. It's like the perfect marketing place to really sell it in. But I think there's authenticity and genuineness in that mentality because the people that you want are the people that are ready to take that full plunge because those are the people that are going to get the most out of the experience because they're in the right headspace and the right intentionality to make the growth that they need to make. Where do we go from this point in terms of supporting each other as a community, as individuals, as a society, as a culture? How do we step up for one another?
I think like what you said, it really comes down to that intentionality, that mindfulness, right? Being willing, because we know that we're all able.
Yeah.
But being willing to have those conversations, to say something as simple as, how are you feeling today? What's on your mind? And I don't mean that office talk. I don't mean that, how are you? Good. How are you? Good. I don't mean that.
Yeah.
I mean, what's going on with you? How are you feeling? I want to know. Right? Because the two are very different.
Yeah. I mean, that's genuinely showing up for one another, and that's special. Well, I can say that you've modeled through the time that I've known you, which isn't all that short of a time, actually, now that we look back on it, an eagerness to grow and to evolve and to be authentic, but also just to be courageous in spirit. And, we talked a couple nights ago about your name and the idea that it means neighbor, right? And that you carry this spirit of really being a neighbor, and that's showing up for other people, and that's bringing all of yourself, your joy, your humility, any tools that you bring to the table. And there's a beauty to that, and I think we can all learn something from the way that you hold people. So I appreciate you offering your perspective on everything, because it's powerful.
Thank you so much. And I'm so happy to be here. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah.
This was wonderful.
Well, this is Jarah Boyce, and I'll sell therapy for you, for anybody that's on the fence, because I think it is incredibly important. But above all, if you're willing to show up for yourself, if you're willing to take those steps to evolve and grow, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's inconvenient, you can become a better version of yourself on the other side. You can become the person that you're called and ordained to be. You can experience so much joy, so much love, and so much authenticity when you just lean in and surrender. But thanks so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you soon.
We gotta work on the problems. We gotta link up to solve them. We gotta keep on evolving. Gotta be side by side.